Hello and welcome to the 320 session here at the CSUN ATV Broadcast Studio TV. This is an interesting session. It's preparing for global accessibility regulations, and we're going to be talking with representatives of experts in the European Accessibility Act and the Accessibility Canada Act. First of all, joining us from the law firm of Davis Wright Tremaine is Brendan Johnson. Just want to correct, he's on my left. Want to correct the program. He just moved to Davis Wright Tremaine from Perkins Coie, so it's not what it says in the program. But he is a partner at Davis Wright Tremaine. And to his left is Mr. Phil Riskala, who is Accessibility Standards Canada CEO. And we're going to start with Phil. Phil, can you, before we do though, how many people are here from Canada, just out of curiosity? We got a few. How about Europe? Got a few. I assume the rest are US-based, trying to find out what the others are doing. Okay. So we'll start with Phil. Phil, could you provide a brief overview of the EAA, I'm sorry, the Canada Act, we started with Phil. The Accessibility Canada Act went into force 2019. Provide some background on it, though it's not based in Ottawa. Why do you think it's a landmark piece of legislation?
Absolutely. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a history. So for the Canadians here, most of you will know what I'm about to say. For others, this will be groundbreaking news. So the Accessible Canada Act came into force in 2019, and it came about as a result of a lot of consultation with the community of persons with disabilities. So the government spent a year consulting with thousands of people, thousands of the, persons with disabilities, to kind of identify and recognize what are the concerns, what are the obstacles that they're facing. So after this consultation, the Act was formed, but I'm going to give you a few steps that happened between the consultation and the Act. So we've all heard of the UN, or United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So our Act is very, very similar in principle to what that UN convention says. In essence, the version, the 101 version of that is we want to have a barrier-free Canada by 2040. We want to remove all obstacles for all Canadians, all persons to be able to access services, access buildings, receive their communication, understand their communication. So that's the premise of what the Act is. And the way the Act was developed back in 2019 was that there was 3 entities that were developed. One of them was Accessibility Standards Canada. That's my department, or my corporation. And as the name implies, we develop standards. But standards to remove barriers to accessibility. And I'll talk a little bit about the areas that we develop those standards. And then there's another entity that is Accessibility Commissioner. That individual is responsible for the enforcement. So if somebody feels that their human rights have been violated, they have a mechanism and a venue to go to lodge that complaint. That office then has mechanisms within their power to levy fines or whatever mechanisms they need to ensure that that violation doesn't occur again in the future. And then the third party would be the Accessibility Commissioner. That individual is responsible for going around the country, speaking to the communities, understanding where there's still pain points, where are we making progress, where are we not making progress, and that person reports back to the same minister that I report to. So it's basically a watchdog or a monitor of events across the country and the status of what's happening. So the 3 entities together, and we work together very, very closely. We meet with each other quite regularly. We kind of work as a team. So we develop the standards. And so let me just tell you a little bit about our standards and why I believe they're very, very important, why it's a very unique system. We develop standards to remove barriers to accessibility. So everybody here has heard the term minimum acceptable when you talk about codes and standards. So minimum acceptable, and when you talk to somebody and they say, well, I don't have a ramp here, but I built it to code. It's minimally acceptable, I built it to code. And you shake your head and you say, well, you could build it to code, but it doesn't meet the needs of all persons. So when we develop our standards, we look at it from a perspective of inclusivity, everybody. So rather than just design our standard based on the way most codes and standards are developed in the world, on a 75 percentile, 78 percentile of the population, usually able-bodied persons, we develop based on about 95 percentile. So we try to capture a much bigger and much broader group of the population. And in doing so, we believe we're going to get a much better product at the end. So our standards are not minimum acceptable. Our standards are deemed to be equity-based standards. So that's the difference between what we're doing and others are doing. Where we're very, very similar to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we follow very similar principles. This saying that says nothing without us. We take that to heart. When we develop our standards, they're not bureaucrats sitting in an office developing these standards. These are technical committees made up of persons with disabilities. Upwards of 58%, that's the minimum. We have higher than that in many of our committees, are persons with disabilities or lived experience. They're the ones that are actually developing these standards for us. When we consult with a community of persons with disabilities. When we try to identify the areas that we need to develop standards in, we consult with the community of persons with disabilities. And let me just qualify this. We're not just tokenizing people on our committees because they're a person with a disability. We're bringing in lawyers that happen to have some disability. They may be in a wheelchair, or somebody who may be deaf that's an engineer. Like, these are experts, but they also have the lived experience. So it takes us a little longer to find those experts, but we believe the product that comes out of the process is second to none in the world.
And it comes to making everything accessible to people with disabilities. The entire country must be geared up to make this possible. ASC, your company, or your group, is making a lot of efforts in this direction. Could you elaborate on Canada's pioneering efforts on building a barrier-free Canada?
Absolutely. So we follow the saying that if you regulate everything, you're probably not going to have success, because nobody wants to have 1,000 pieces of legislation coming down their throat. Industry doesn't want it, government doesn't want it, the private sector doesn't want it. So we're taking kind of a novel approach to how we want this to happen. We developed some standards with the intention that I can go to my minister directly and say, put this into legislation. This is the power that's given to me under the Act. So we could do that in some cases, but we also recognize that if we do that too many times, it's going to be very burdensome on society, because there's a lot of legislation, and it's one thing to put legislation in, but you have to have somebody monitor and enforce and to make sure this is working. So the approach that we're taking is we're working with our partners. So our partners, in our case, we develop at a federal level, at a national level, I should say, and we work with what would be equivalent in the States to the state level, but in our case, the provincial and territorial levels. We work with those levels of government. We also work with industry within those levels of government as well. And we try to convince them to actually start adopting our standards, to start using our standards voluntarily before we go forward with the legislative mechanism, which we have a right to do. So we're piloting, in some cases, some of the standards. We're encouraging them to use some of our standards. We're providing them tools so they can use our standards, whether that's costing information. One of the biggest concerns and one of the biggest questions we always receive is that if you're going to put the standard in, we can't afford to do it. We can't afford to do what you're asking us to do. And there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that says, yeah, it's going to cost us 3 times as much if you want to implement something. And so we dismiss those myths because they're really not true. We've done costing. So if you take a built environment standard, a building code standard, for example, and you want to implement measures of accessibility into that standard, what we've recognized and what we've seen based on independent studies, we've had engineers and architects and others do the studies for us. So they're not biased based on the fact that a specific community group said this is what it cost. We've had independent groups do the studies, and about 80% of it can be done at zero cost. 80% of the changes that we're asking for, whether you ask somebody to put a light switch at this level or at that level, there's no additional cost. Even if you ask somebody to use a wider door versus a smaller door, there's usually no additional cost. Usually there's no additional cost. It's just a slightly, a couple inches wider on the door, there's no additional cost. So that other 20%, we come up with really innovative ways to try to achieve that last 20% for the accessibility piece. And I think in doing so, it encourages a lot of the users to go forward and implement some of these provisions. And one of the biggest arguments that we try to dismiss is that this is not going to hurt you. This is actually going to help your business. It's going to make you more profitable. You're going to get more clients, whether it's a condo that you're building or whether it's a shopping mall that you want to get people into it. You're actually going to increase your business in doing what we're asking you to do. So these are the approaches that we're taking.
So your group, ASC, is leading changes in Canada, but what's your message to the global population?
Yeah, so yes, we do develop standards. So Accessibility Standards Canada is an accredited standards development organization. Everybody's eyes have this glazed over. I recognize this because that doesn't mean much to very many people, but being accredited means that the standards that we develop not only are regionally recognized and nationally recognized, but they're also internationally recognized. You've heard of ISO, you've heard of other international standards. We would hold the same ranking as far as credibility in our standards. So when we develop our standards, the hope is that we develop them, we make them freely accessible to everyone. We also make them accessible, in the term accessibility, to everyone. And then we want to share this with the world. We want them to start using our standards. We don't care about, giving revenue off of this. We just want people to start using these standards and implementing them to the best way that they can. So on an international level, we're hoping that the standards that we create, because we're creating it at a very, very high level with a lot of credibility. We're spending a lot of time creating this and a lot of money creating these, upwards of $1 or $2 million per standard. We're putting a lot of investment into these standards. We hope that it'll be taken up in the rest of the world. In addition to this, our organization also funds research. So we have a grants and contribution program where we give out money. We funded 77 projects so far in the last 4 years since their inception. Spent $60 or $70 million on research projects. All this research helps us to form opinions on our standards, also helps us to set policy for government, and helps the industry to actually make decisions, whether it's strategic decisions or any other kind of decisions. And we're making that available to the public as well. Anybody can use that information and use it in any way they wish for free.
And finally, what products and services are covered by the Act specifically?
Yeah, so the Act is fairly broad. So there were 7 priority areas that were identified under the Act. So we developed standards in the area of transportation, employment, built environment, communication, information communication technology, procurement, services. So any area that basically touches a person, we will develop standards in those areas. And the Act will actually give us power to enforce and to actually mandate in those areas.
Excellent. Okay, well, Brandon, let's talk about the European Accessibility Act, the EAA. Could you provide a brief overview of the EAA and how it came about?
Sure. So, like the Accessible Canada Act, the EAA, or the European Accessibility Act, was adopted in 2019. And as is the case in many sort of EU legislative actions, it sort of required a multi-year phasing in process. And so in 2022, member states, because this directive had to be, the act had to be transposed, meaning implemented by the member states in their local law. Member states are required to have, transpose the law into their local law by 2022, and the law comes into force in June, I believe it's June 28th of next year. This act was intended to sort of be a, you might say, kind of omnibus act for accessibility within the EU. There are other directives that touch on accessibility, one called the Web Accessibility Directive, some provisions on accessibility in the EU Electronic Communications Code. But the EAA was really intended to harmonize standards across the EU as it relates to accessibility, particularly in relation to devices and services that are found in the modern digital era. And so, I guess like the ACA, it's a fairly wide-ranging act. It actually covers specified products and services that touch on everything from audiovisual communications to regular communications, like electronic communication services and things of that nature, even things like e-readers and e-books, self-service terminals. So it runs the gamut in terms of products and services that are covered. And what makes the EAA somewhat notable and distinguishable from other accessibility regimes in the global context is that the relevant obligations turn on the role of the actor. So if you're a manufacturer, you have certain obligations. If you're a distributor or an importer or a service provider, there are different requirements that may apply depending on the role that you play. And if you play more than one role, right, you may have multiple sort of obligations to which you have to comply. So it's a very broad scoped law that was really intended to kind of make consistent the requirements across the market in the EU.
Could you be specific about some of the sample products and services that are covered by the Act?
Sure, yeah. So and this is the scoping exercise of determining which products are in and are outside of the scope of the law is something that I've advised clients on regularly, and it's not very simple. So the Act distinguishes between products, as they're termed, and services. And you can think of products as things generally that are kind of hardware. So that covers computers and their operating systems. It includes devices that are used for audiovisual media. So think of like, it could be a smartphone. Includes devices that are used for communication, so that could also include a smartphone, but other communications devices. The services are, by their name, sort of more software-oriented. And so, for example, actual communications tools. So if you have a chat, say, tool on a device, the device may be separately covered, but the service itself as a service under the Act would be covered. There are e-commerce services. So if you have flow through which the user can actually purchase goods online, then that itself can fall within the ambit of the law. So those are just examples of some of the products and services that are covered.
And you mentioned that the EAA must be implemented by EU member states. Can you give us more detail on the implementation process and the status of member state transpositions?
Yes, it's a very good question, and I will say it's somewhat messy. Because this is a directive, as I mentioned at the outset, the act is required to be implemented by each EU member state, and that poses a couple of challenges. One is just the administrative challenge of implementing law. So, the legislatures in various countries have to get together and actually pull together legislation to actually implement the directive. I think I checked actually earlier today, and I won't name the countries, but there's some countries that have not even begun the transposition process, even though that technically should have completed a couple years ago, and others are in different stages of completion. So in terms of the actual administrative act of making this into local law, that is something that is still in process and a bit messy. Separately, the way I usually describe the EAA is sort of the floor. So the act does provide for some variance among member states, and so you can have member states that have, let's say, different penalties that could be assessed depending on where you are in the market. It's a very complex type of legislative exercise and still in process. And hopefully by next year will be finalized, but still a lot of work to be done there.
And let's talk about enforcement. What penalties are permitted under the EAA, and how do you expect it to be enforced?
Yes, another very good question, and one that companies around the world, or particularly in the EU, are concerned with, because the enforcement picture is kind of the stick that often people are sort of aware of when it comes to compliance with laws. The actual standard in the EAA when it comes to penalties is that the penalties have to be, I believe it's effective, proportionate, and dissuasive. And that's it. So there's not really much in the way of clarity as to what that means. And because the act has to be transposed by the member states, then, as I mentioned earlier, every member state can take its own approach to what the penalties are. We have some analogs that we can draw from. So, for example, in the privacy context, there's something called the General Data Privacy Regulation that's been in effect for a couple of years. And in that area, I believe the maximum penalty that can be assessed is 4% of the annual revenues of a company. So it's a pretty significant penalty that can be imposed. We don't know what the relevant requirements will be yet because obviously the transposition process is still happening, but we expect the EU member states to take a similar approach with respect to accessibility as they've done in privacy and other areas. And the same is true for the enforcement sort of posture as it relates to the activity of the regulator. So the Act basically authorizes member states to designate certain regulatory authorities to enforce the laws. And we don't know what that will look like, but the European market tends to be a more aggressive regulatory market, and so we imagine that there will likely be a reasonable amount of enforcement activity within the EU.
And when would that penalty thing start?
So the penalty, I guess the compliance deadline is June 28th, 2025. So that is the date by which the member states, or I guess they should have transposed by 2022, but that's the date by which covered entities like manufacturers, service providers, et cetera, are required to be compliant. So another way to put this is by that date, you could expect to receive, let's say, a complaint notice or be the recipient of enforcement activity. I'd say historically and practically, there usually is some degree of grace period because there's some ramping up in terms of getting into compliance. But because it's been a multi-year process and because there is a formal compliance deadline, you should expect by late June of next year to possibly suffer the consequences of non-compliance to the extent that you're out of compliance.
How about in Canada, Phil? Is your compliance date already started, or?
So we have the commissioner is in place, and the commissioner is the one that's responsible for the enforcement. So not my department doesn't do this. We create the standards, we work with them, we interpret, we provide guidance. But we can, I would say we're probably very, very much like you. There's going to be a phase-in period for any kind of penalty, any kind of enforcement. Right now, you have to have legislation in place. So you have to have a standard that's gone into legislation so that somebody who wants to lodge a complaint can point to that piece of legislation and say, I've been violated because they didn't meet regulation X, Y, Z. So until that legislation is in place, and we're still very new, we're still incorporating a lot of that legislation. Until that's in place, it's very hard to really come in and say we're going to penalize company X. So I think we're probably about a year, maybe 2 years away from having legislation in place in certain areas. And once that legislation is in place, it'll be up to the commissioner's office. I'm not going to speak on their behalf, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is a grace period, because the act is 4 years old. And it takes 4 years to create standards. It creates another couple of years to get it into force and to get people aware of what's going on. So I don't think the second it goes into force, you're going to start hitting them with penalties. I think there'll be education, there'll be 6-month grace periods, but I think if it continues, then there's probably going to be the same sort of thing where penalties will start being imposed on these individuals.
So you both have indicated to me you have some familiarity with U.S. laws, and based originally from ADA, but also more with accessibility, Section 508 and other laws like that. Let's start with enforcement as a comparison to U.S. law. Section 508, there's anecdotal stories about, an agency was violating something, so the Justice Department went in and notified the agency, and the agency that goes and protects it and defends it is the Justice Department. So there's a little bit of conflict of interest. Tell us what happens, and we'll start with Canada, since we're with you, Phil.
Yeah, so I'm fairly familiar with what goes on in the States, and I don't know if it's going to be the same sort of thing happening in Canada. So let's say we'll just pick a sector that's mandated under the federal government, the banking sector. So if the banking sector violates whatever they need to violate, or any company for that matter violates a part of an act, I don't think it's going to be Justice Canada. We have our own lawyers within Justice Canada going to support, go back and be the lawyers that are supporting the bank against the government themselves. So I don't think it works that way. So I don't see it happening the same way as in the States. Now, if it's against a federal department, this is a little different, because basically you're saying you have a federal department imposing a penalty on another federal department, and this federal department is just going to take money from this pocket and put it into this pocket. And at the end, it's going to be neutral for the government. But I don't think it's going to work that way, because I think the reputation for that organization is going to be harmed. And no organization, no minister, no deputy minister, no director, nobody in the department wants to be seen as the person that's not accommodating, not meeting an accessibility act or human rights violations. Nobody wants that. So I think a lot of it's going to happen, not monetarily, but a lot of it's going to happen because it's the right thing to happen. And I think that's the way you're going to see a lot of the enforcement occur in Canada.
How about in Europe, Brandon?
Yes, this is a very interesting question, and I think one that's ripe for resolution. Just to give a little bit of background, in the U.S., there are, say, sort of two camps when it comes to enforcement. One that arises under the Americans with Disabilities Act is kind of more, let's say, aggressive in terms of the enforcement posture. So there is something called a private right of action, meaning individuals actually have the right to sue under the act. And so it's created a cottage industry of plaintiffs' attorneys who pursue companies for violations. So that may beget what are called damages, or kind of monetary remedies, as well as remedies that require certain actions. By contrast, there are other examples in the U.S. system that have a little bit more of a sort of lighter touch, I guess I would describe it. So one example is there's a law called the 21st Century Communications, Video, and Accessibility Act, or the CVAA, because no one can remember the acronym, or the articulation of the acronym. And that law is enforced by the Federal Communications Commission, which is the communications regulator in the U.S. And under that law, the enforcement is held exclusively by the FCC. But they've taken an approach that is largely dependent on consumer complaint. So if a consumer has an issue, let's say, with a product or service that falls within the scope of the act, they can issue a complaint to the FCC. The FCC will forward that complaint on to the responsible party, and then there's sort of like a confidential back and forth that happens between the consumer and the responsible party as it relates to resolving that complaint. So it's confidential unless it gets escalated, but generally it's confidential. It's not particularly adversarial. It's a little bit more collaborative, and so with respect to the EAA, you could sort of see one of those two routes we take, and one that's a little bit more adversarial or aggressive. Maybe individual citizens could bring complaints, for example, versus one that's regulator-driven that may not be as adversarial or sort of costly or public. So we'll have to see how things evolve.
And let's talk about it comparing to U.S. laws on the front of exceptions to the rule. In other words, in Section 508, there's something called undue burden, where a federal agency doesn't have to comply if it's an undue burden. And for years, NASA sort of has been complying, but hasn't, because their thing is we have too much video. We can't caption all the video. Any parallel anecdotally to Europe?
Yeah, so in Europe, there are actually a couple of different categories of exceptions. The one that's closest to fundamental alteration or undue burden, which is sort of the US ADA and Section 508 analogs, is something called disproportionate burden, which basically is an assessment as to the kind of economic and administrative burden placed on the covered party to comply with the law. So in that sense, there's a similar dimension. But there are certain other categories of exception. So for example, micro enterprises, as they're called in the Act. So I think of entities that have less than $2 million in revenue, I think less than 25 employees, if I remember correctly. They are exempt from many of the requirements. Certain types of products and services. So for example, if you have a product that was brought into the EU prior to the compliance deadline, it's grandfathered as it relates to the requirements, so you don't actually have to comply. So there's kind of a wider swath of exceptions. In the US, aside from undue burden and fundamental alteration, which basically is undue burden meaning economically cumbersome, and fundamental alteration meaning you have to actually alter the fundamental nature of the product in order to comply. Aside from those two exceptions, there are a couple others that are found in certain regimes. So, one that deals with de minimis not compliance. So, if you didn't comply in a very small amount, it may be accepted. Or under the CVA, that FCC law I mentioned earlier, there are certain conditions of achievability. So it's sort of like a technical, economic, and administrative assessment as it relates to the viability of making the changes necessary to be compliant. But I think the EAA is distinguishable because it actually has a number of routes of exception that don't have clear analogs, at least across the board in the U.S. So I imagine that enterprising companies will likely try to claim coverage under those exceptions to the extent they can.
I see. How about in Canada with exceptions, Phil?
Yeah, so again, the enforcement piece is another entity, but the way we're developing our standards is a format such that it doesn't include the word where reasonably practicable or reasonably feasible. We don't use terminology like that because it is really subjective. So we try to avoid that, but we do develop our standards in a way that allows an understanding of the objective so that you can come back with an alternative solution for that objective. So let's just use a very, very simple example. You have a restaurant, and everybody should be entitled to walk through the front door to enter that restaurant to get a service. And there are some restaurants that say, well, if you're in a wheelchair, you need to go through the back alley where the dumpsters are and get through the back, because there's a little lift there and you can come in through the back kitchen area. So if somebody comes back and says, well, this is too costly for us to put a door opener on this door, that's not reasonably practical. We wouldn't say that. If the intent is that everybody walks through the front with dignity like everyone else. But the exception would be if you're in a climate where it's just impossible to put a door on the front of that building for whatever reason. You got 7 feet of snow. There's other reasons geographically, topography, it just won't allow that to happen. Somebody can come back and say, you know what, we'll put a door on the side of the building. You don't have to go by the dumpster. It's just by the side of the building. So it's not meeting the intent of the standard. So somebody can't come in and say, you know what, the standard says that you should be able to walk through the front door. The owners have come back and they've got an allowance to let you come through the side of the building without much hardship. That's kind of the approach we're taking right now. So. And we would allow something like that. The codes would allow you to kind of make that alternative approach going forward. Our hope is so that we're not creating so much litigation. We're not creating so much confusion because Canada is huge and it's not populated like the States. So if we're creating some sort of legislation in a very populated area like Toronto, and we have to apply that up north, in the northern community up north, where the only way you get to it in the wintertime is by dog sled, it's very hard for us to impose the same sort of rules. So we have to be very reasonable in the approach and the way we create our legislation so that it applies across the country.
And what agency negotiates those exceptions?
So it's not an agency. So if it's the federal department, that it's a federally regulated entity, and they're the ones that have to incorporate this, you would work through engineers, depending on what the subject is, and they would come up to some sort of compromise and say, this is equivalent to what the standard of the regulation is requiring. And that's what they would put down and say, we've signed off on this. There's no other way of doing this. This is what we've agreed to. We've brought in experts, and this is what they've deemed to be the appropriate approach to deal with.
Are there business size standard exceptions like Brandon mentioned for Europe?
There is. So again, not our department, but it is under what we call the Accessibility Director. So when they come out, when we create a piece of legislation and they make a recommendation to my minister to put into legislation, it goes through a consultation process. That consultation process may come out and say, businesses under 50 people are exempt. Businesses that are $2 million, use $2 million as an example, a certain monetary value are exempt. Businesses that only do very little interprovincial business are exempt. So there are ways to exempt certain entities, but the objective here is that where you don't have to exempt, you don't exempt. Because you're not going to exempt them just because they're less than 50 people and say, well, nobody can walk into your business now. The door doesn't have a ramp or something. There's going to be certain limits of where you'll be exempt from some of these requirements.
And we'll ask both of you this, but from a cost perspective, what has been the pushback from business and the commercial arena? Have they been pushing back, and have you been responding to it in the legislation?
Yeah, so can I take this one first? Yeah, so absolutely. There's always pushback on cost. So it's up to us. We're not going to dispute. We're not going to sit here and argue with a multi-billion-dollar organization and say, you guys can't afford to do this. That's not our intent. We come up with regulation. In many cases, we do cost-benefit analysis. We cost this out. We know that to go from what's currently required in a building code, for example, if it's a building requirement, I'll use building as examples, to what we're asking you for, it may have a delta increase of this much to put that cost in. And we provide that information to them so that when they come back and they make the argument back to government that we can't do this because it's going to cost us $10 million to incorporate these changes, we can come and show them that it's actually going to cost you $10. We can show them with the real numbers. Then it's up to the government to decide whether they're going to exempt this group or whether they'll come back with some grace period to allow this to happen.
Okay, how about in Europe?
Yeah, so in Europe, certainly cost is a consideration. Actually, speaking to a client actually earlier today about the challenges of trying to retrofit, say, devices for compliance with the law. And one thing to note is, I mentioned that June 28th, 2025 compliance date. That pertains to any unit of a device that is, or service, let's say, that is entered into the EU market. So even if you had let's say, a pre-existing product that was manufactured years ago, any unit of that product that's entered can fall within the scope of the law. And so the cost of future planning, right, kind of making sure that you're compliant on a sort of prospective basis is something that clients and companies are thinking about, but also retrospectively, those products and services that actually may still be within the sweep of the law, even after the compliance date, even if they predated the compliance date, means that it just takes more time and energy to figure out, well, how do we do this? As I mentioned, there is the disproportionate burden analysis, which does at least take into account cost, but we don't know how that will be interpreted because the law is not fully enforced yet. And I would just say, looking at other analogs, regulators tend to take a sort of narrow view. So it's not simply not economical, but really has to be a significant expense, almost not even viable as an option. And so I imagine that will likely lead to fewer companies being able to really take full advantage of that type of exception.
And what facet of accessibility has led to the most pushback, anecdotally or otherwise, that you could call first Europe?
It's a good question. I think probably writ large hardware-related requirements. So this law is somewhat distinct in that it actually does have requirements that are particular to certain devices, including actually things like self-service terminals, like ATM machines, ticketing kiosk, and that kind of stuff, which obviously is harder once you ship that to retrofit to make it compliant. And so definitely hardware, because of the engineering that's required to make the hardware and the limited ability to kind of modify post commercial launch. That's something that, let's say, by contrast with software, if you can push a software update, even if it's not compliant day one, again, it should be compliant day one, but even if it's not, it's easier to perhaps send a patch that can resolve the issue and certainly do it more efficiently and cheaply.
I see. How about in Canada, Phil?
Yeah, so I think the one that's getting probably the most pushback right now is the housing sector. We all, Canada, U.S., European countries are all suffering with the same thing: lack of housing, lack of affordable housing, definitely lack of affordable, accessible housing. And now we come in and we want to try to introduce some measures that allow visitability into homes or accessibility ready homes. And people are pushing back. Houses are already way too expensive, and in their mind, they believe that if you start adding more legislation that you require wider corridors, you're going to have less space to rent out or less space to use. That's going to have a cost on the end user, which is the person that's trying to get into the housing market. So probably the biggest area, and this is why we're spending a lot of effort and time coming up with alternatives and costing and different options for people to consider that are almost cost neutral for them.
So there's actually regulations that if you wanted to buy your own house and live in it, that you'd have to comply with regulations on width of hallways and
Yeah,
stuff?
so the regulation isn't there yet, but what we want to do is if somebody wants to go and buy a house today, and they're a person with a disability and they need specific features in that home, they're not going to. You can't just say, I need a house that allows me to have X, Y, Z built into this house,
Right.
and then tomorrow move into the house. It'll take them 18 months to find a house to meet those conditions. So what we want to do is we want to come up with regulations that say, if somebody needs a home that you need to provide a ramp or a wider door, let's at least build a house with a wider door up front. So you don't have that added cost down the road. It doesn't cost you any more to do it now. Put the wider door in now. Let's have a space ready in front of the house without any structural features that allow you to put a ramp in. So if you do need to come into that house, the space is there for you to add that ramp in after the fact without having to tear down a wall or a retaining wall or a driveway to put that ramp in. So we're coming back with solutions and say, okay, just reconfigure the way you're designing this house. Add a few little features here and there, or change the way you design certain things. Don't put a load-bearing wall in this part if you know that in the future you may need to expand that corridor. So yes, we're going to put some legislation, but again, they're cost neutral. You have to think about it ahead of time. So you're not designing it for the 75 percentile, you're designing it for the 95 percentile. And we're not telling you put a ramp in every single house. We're not telling you put in specific lighting in every type of house and don't use carpeting in every single house. We're not asking for that. We're saying get it ready. And
the enforcement mechanism for that is local zoning regulations and building permits, or how would that work?
it's not there yet, but it would be through the local zoning
Okay.
offices, yeah.
How about in Europe?
Yeah, so actually, I forgot to mention one other area that I think is an area of concern or pushback and somewhat distinguishable from the U.S. Is that under the AAA, so what I've spoken about so far has been about sort of what I call the substantive obligations, the actual, how do we make this product or service accessible? But in addition to that requirement, there also are sort of corollary administrative and information requirements. So, for example, you have to have a certain mark called a CE mark on devices. You have to maintain documentation. There's certain reporting obligations. So if you find out, either you learn or you suspect that your product or service is not compliant, you're required to affirmatively report that to the relevant regulatory authorities, as well as other documentation and certification requirements. So I'll say administration of this, putting aside the actual substantive compliance, will have additional costs and complexity on companies.
So there's a little bit of turning yourself in, basically?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, you're compelled to turn yourself in, and I imagine if you don't, then the penalties are probably going to be stiffer, for sure, yeah.
So we only have a few minutes. Any closing thoughts on lessons learned that for the rest of the world that's trying to deal with this also? I'll start with you, Brandon.
Yeah, I think in the accessibility space, the accessible legal space, the U.S. has historically been the kind of premier area, the one that has the greatest number of laws and generally the most aggressive posture. I think this European Accessibility Act is likely going to sort of challenge that position, in part just given the scope of the law and its complexity. And that also has been the case in other areas. I mentioned privacy, digital services more generally, and antitrust, meaning competition issues. That the EU is kind of staking a claim for being kind of a aggressive leader in the space. So I think you'll see, again, Canada I'm sure will be somewhat distinct, but other regimes around the world will likely look to, say, the EU or the US as the benchmark against which they will measure their own accessibility regimes and develop their plans accordingly.
How about from the Canadian perspective, lessons learned, Philip?
Yeah, so from our perspective, I like to think we're pioneers in what we're doing, and I think we're also trailblazers. This shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. What we're developing is not rocket science. It's not. Whether it's a standard for employment or the standard for communication, the technology is there. I mean, you go to these you go to this session here that we're at, and you see lots of technology. So it's not a matter of not having the technology. I think the biggest challenge that we're going to be facing as a nation, and probably as the world, is a mindset shift. Getting people to start thinking about not just designing for the way we've been designing in the past, or in accommodating that small percent, well, not that small percentage, but that 75 percentile of people, but designing for the masses. Once you start designing for the masses up front, the argument about, well, this is going to cost me more because you're asking me to do this, the question should be, I did it wrong the first time, and now I'm just trying to correct it. It's not a matter of you're asking me to do more. You just didn't do it right the first time, so we're just asking you to do it right. And I think that's the message that we have to start getting out a little more.
Got it. Well, I appreciate that. It's been a fascinating session, guys. This has been Preparing for Global Accessibility Regulations with Brandon Johnson, formerly of Perkins Coie, and now a partner with Davis Wright Tremaine in Washington, D.C., and Philip Rizkallah, who's CEO of Accessibility Standards Canada. Please give them a big round of applause.